What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the JT Sports Podcast, aka JT Sports Live. I'm your host, JT. Got a really exciting episode for you guys. We're going to be discussing what teams are the biggest threats to the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles in their respective conferences. CJ Stroud, what are my rookie expectations for him going into his first season as a NFL QB? Can Oregon make the college football playoffs this season? And do the Miami Dolphins have a top 3 roster in the NFL going into this season? If you haven't already, make sure that you guys leave a like on the stream and subscribe to the channel if you're new. We go live every day at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. Listen to the JT Sports Podcast, available on all podcasting platforms. We're not just on YouTube. You can check us out on Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can find the JT Sports Podcast. All you got to do is go to whichever podcasting service that you use, type in the JT Sports Podcast, and it will pop up. Or you can go down to the description down below, scroll down a little bit, and you can click on one of the podcast links, and it will take you directly to it. We're going to start off talking about this. What team is the biggest threat to the Kansas City Chiefs and the AFC? And no, Kansas City fans, the answer is not yourselves. I'm not finna take that as a legitimate answer. I think that there are 3 teams in the AFC that have a really good chance at being able to knock off Kansas City this year. My first one, you guys already know who I'm going with. The Cincinnati Bengals with Joe Burrow. Y'all boys know I love me some Joe Burrow. And the Bengals have gotten right with Kansas City for the last 2 seasons. And last year, Cincinnati came really close to beating Kansas City again. And there's a reason why they call Arrowhead Burrowhead. My boy Joe Burrow is without a doubt the second best quarterback in the NFL. And although he's not on the same level as Patrick Mahomes, I don't think he's too far off. Like Joe Burrow, this dude is my favorite player in the league right now. And when you look at Cincinnati, the only thing that has held them back from not only winning the Super Bowl, but also being able to beat Kansas City last year was that damn offensive line. And you thought that their offensive line was going to be fixed up and good enough to beat Kansas City last year, but it severely underperformed. So this offseason, what did they do again? They continue to upgrade the offensive line. They bring in Orlando Brown at left tackle. They're going to be kicking Jonah Williams out to right tackle. So this offensive line should be more than good enough to be able to beat Kansas City. We know how good this defense is going to be with Lou Anarumo, their defensive coordinator, remaining on the staff. He had a couple of head coaching interviews. He didn't get any of those head coaching jobs. I have a strong feeling that he's going to be a head coach somewhere next year. So when you have Lou Anarumo coming back, you know that your defense is going to be able to give Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs offense a lot of problems. Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, Travis Kelce always say that Lou Anarumo's defense gives them the most difficult time every single time they play. And if the offensive line ends up finally gelling and coming together, the Cincinnati Bengals probably have the best shot out of all the teams at being able to knock off Kansas City. Now, what about the Baltimore Ravens? Because I think a lot of people are really sleeping on Baltimore when it comes to the Super Bowl conversation. And you can say I'm overrating the Ravens all you want to, but with the additions that they made this offseason, they bring in offensive coordinator Todd Monken, you bring in OBJ, you draft Zay Flowers, you have Rashad Bateman, you guard Mark Andrews. The Baltimore Ravens had a top 10 defense last year. All they needed was for this offense to finally give Lamar Jackson some legitimate weapons in the passing game. And they did that. They also upgraded that offensive coordinator. Todd Monken is going to be able to elevate Lamar Jackson. He is going to unlock Lamar Jackson's full potential. You guys ever watch that episode of Dragon Ball Z when they went to planet, I think it was Namek, with all the green people, and they went to see the Grand Elder, and one of those people put their hands on who it was. I don't remember who it was, but they ended up unlocking somebody's full potential. That's what Todd Monken is going to do with Lamar Jackson. And I don't give a damn about what Lamar Jackson has done in the playoffs in the past, because you don't win football games based on history. The Baltimore Ravens have a fantastic coaching staff. They have a great defense, and they're going to have a really good offense. And Lamar Jackson is finally going to have enough weapons to be able to go to Arrowhead and knock off Patrick Mahomes if the opportunity presents itself. I think that the Ravens are definitely a legitimate threat in the AFC to Kansas City. Y'all people keep trying to judge these teams based on what they did in the past. Y'all make it seem like Lamar Jackson would never be able to be a successful quarterback in the playoffs. And it's not like Lamar Jackson doesn't have a playoff win. All he really needed was a good supporting cast and a solid offensive coordinator. And Lamar Jackson has that. Now, this last team that I'm going to bring up, it's probably going to surprise a lot of people, but I'm going with the New York Jets. The New York Jets with Aaron Rodgers, man, I think they're good enough to win this conference. The New York Jets almost made it to the postseason last year with Joe Flacco, Zach Wilson, and Mike White at QB. If they can win the amount of games that they did last season with those quarterbacks, I'm pretty sure they should be able to be a playoff team with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. Now, we don't know what version of Aaron Rodgers we're going to get, but I don't think that the New York Jets need MVP caliber Aaron Rodgers to be able to win this conference. They're going to have one of the best defenses in the NFL, and you got to remember that this defense was already elite last year, given the fact that the offense was god-awful. When you have an offense that's able to actually be efficient and sustain drives, it helps out your defense because your defense doesn't have to be on the field for as many plays as what they were last year. And when I look at the New York Jets, man, Aaron Rodgers came out a couple of days ago, and this man said he's having a lot of fun. He's had the most fun in the 6 weeks that he's been with the New York Jets up to this point than he has had his last couple of years in Green Bay. And y'all may think that Aaron Rodgers is being a diva and he's being petty, but you can see it out there. You want to know why Aaron Rodgers is having fun? Because he actually has a team that has the weapons that he needs to be able to win the Super Bowl. Y'all remember when y'all was doubting Tom Brady when he went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? And y'all was like, oh, JT, I don't know if it's going to work, man. You got COVID. I don't think the Buccaneers and him are going to be able to get the chemistry down pat, yada, yada, yada. And what happened? Tom Brady got it done. The reason why Tom Brady left New England was because he knew at his age he wasn't going to be able to still perform at a high level and win a championship if he doesn't have the necessary weapons around him. And Aaron Rodgers knew that during his time in Green Bay. And Green Bay, every time they had the opportunity to get a good receiver in the first round, these fools always went ahead and either they drafted a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman, or they traded up for Jordan Love. If you was Aaron Rodgers, would that not piss you off too? The New York Jets, man, I think that they're going to get a really good version of Aaron Rodgers. It's not like he's going to a situation where he has to learn a completely new offense. You got Nathaniel Hackett there. And although we knew that Nathaniel Hackett was a whiff at head coach during his time at the Denver Broncos, him and Russell Wilson just weren't a good fit. The scheme and offense that he was running was not good for Russell Wilson's skill set. Aaron Rodgers is going to be a way better fit in that offense because Nathaniel Hackett and him have already spent time together during their time when they was in Green Bay. So for Aaron Rodgers, he's pretty much going to be picking up from where he left off, going to the New York Jets, not really having to learn the whole entire playbook. He's going to have a lot of familiarity, and he's going to be really comfortable. The only thing when it comes to Aaron Rodgers is how long is it going to take for him to click with his new receivers. This is one of the most talented teams in the AFC. I mean, they're stacked at receiver. Garrett Wilson, Allen Lazard is a good deep threat. He also can be a really good number 2, number 3 wide receiver at times. The offensive line is pretty good. Let's not forget about Mecole Hardman. I mean, this dude wasn't a jabroni when he was playing for the Kansas City Chiefs. He was actually pretty solid at times. I just feel like he was underutilized at times during his stint with the Kansas City Chiefs. Breece Hall is going to be coming back fully healthy, even though we wonder if this is going to be the same Breece Hall that we saw before he went down with that injury. And then your offensive line is a little bit better than what a lot of people give it credit for, and we already know about what this defense is going to bring to the table. If you're Kansas City, you really don't want to see the New York Jets, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Baltimore Ravens in the AFC Championship. You damn sure don't want to see the Cincinnati Bengals. Be honest, Kansas City, out of all these teams I just mentioned, the last team you really want to see is Cincinnati, bro. Because you know what Joe Burrow does when he goes to Burrowhead. I mean, that was your first time beating Joe Burrow at home in how long? Joe Burrow runs Arrowhead, man. I know it's called Arrowhead Stadium, but for right now, it's still called Burrowhead until y'all can even up the score. This man, Joe Burrow, runs Arrowhead, man, and y'all got really lucky last time y'all played Cincinnati. Y'all really did. And Joe Burrow also folded late in that game. But I promise you, you don't want to see Cincinnati in the AFC Championship, and you definitely don't want to see Lamar Jackson. You already got to account for his rushing ability. Now he's going to be able to air the football out because he's going to have an offensive coordinator that's going to have some legitimate passing concepts. That's going to give Steve Spagnuolo's defense some problems. The New York Jets finally got a QB. Y'all better watch out. Now, I'm not going to overlook Buffalo, but I just feel like Buffalo's time has kind of passed, man. Like, I mean, I know Buffalo is going to be in the mix, man, but I don't like Buffalo more than I like the Jets, the Ravens, and the Bengals. I mean, their time passed, man. The AFC has gotten a lot better since the last time we saw Kansas City and Buffalo match up in the postseason. But these are the teams that I think are the biggest threats to Kansas City and the AFC this year. Let's move on to the NFC, man. Who's the biggest threat to Philadelphia? Because a lot of people think Philadelphia is going to go right back to the Super Bowl this year, man. Listen, Philadelphia still has the best roster in this conference. I know they lost a lot to free agency. They lost Javon Hargrave, who went to the damn San Francisco 49ers. Like, oh my God. You just gonna let Javon Hargrave walk out the door and go to San Francisco like they already didn't have a nasty defensive line at first? You got Javon Hargrave and Nick Bosa? You know they gonna be a threat. You know the 49ers gonna be there despite the questions that they have at QB. We don't know who the hell is gonna be starting. Is it gonna be Brock Purdy, Trey Lance, or whoever else? But one thing about San Francisco is that you know that they have a really good roster, top to bottom. The offensive line is really good. At receiver, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, who had a little bit of a down year last season. And then you got that boy, Christian McCaffrey. And then we can't forget about Elijah Mitchell. And Kyle Shanahan, this dude is probably the best play caller in the game right now. And even though they did lose D'Amico Ryans, their defensive coordinator, you know who they have replacing him? Steve Wilkes. You saw what Steve Wilkes was doing there with Carolina last season. Carolina damn near won the division with Steve Wilkes as the interim head coach. He had that defense rolling. And Steve Wilkes is kind of auditioning for an NFL head coaching job because he got a really bad deal when he was briefly the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. They didn't really give that dude a chance. So the 49ers, they're definitely going to be up there. But the team that I think is a bigger threat to the Eagles and the 49ers, and y'all got to bear with me because y'all about to say that I'm tripping, but I promise you that I'm not tripping. The Seattle Seahawks, bro. The Seattle Seahawks, I've been talking about these boys for the last couple of weeks. They got a squad. Geno Smith, y'all wrote him off. He didn't write back. He was playing at the MVP level last year. These boys had the two best rookie offensive tackles in the league. It's funny how when they trade Russell Wilson, they finally get good offensive line play. They had Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross. Those were the two best rookie offensive tackles in the NFL. And although they did kind of struggle during the second half of last season, for the most part, they had really outstanding rookie seasons. And going into their second seasons, they're going to be even better. And then they drafted Michigan center Alua Timmy, who damn near was the best center in college football last season. He could start. Seattle's offensive line is going to be really good, but you look at the receiving core, oh my God. They already had DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Now you add Jackson Smith and the Jigba in the slot? But that boy is a technician for real. Who's going to be stopping Seattle's offense this year? You got Kenneth Walker, who didn't even start until, week 5 of last year? And you drafted Zach Charbonnet? This offense is loaded. I think that Seattle has a more talented offense than the San Francisco 49ers. And y'all may think I'm tripping, but I promise you I'm not tripping. I really think that Seattle this year has a good enough team to really be able to challenge for the NFC. This defense, not only do they have a lot of talent, but they got a lot of depth. They got pass rushers galore. I mean, we know about Darrell Taylor, Uchenna Nwosu. Both of those guys had 9.5 sacks each last season, but they also have Boye Mafe. They have plenty of talent and depth when it comes to the defensive line and the ability to get pressure on the quarterback. At linebacker, Jordan Brooks, they brought back B-Wags, who never should have left in the first place. It was really disrespectful and dishonorable for Seattle to do one of the greatest linebackers in the past decade like that. Bobby Wagner, hell, is one of the best players in the history of Seattle. I'm glad they brought him back. But this secondary could be really special this year. Y'all know how much I love Devon Witherspoon when he was coming out of Illinois. I was talking about Devon Witherspoon way before we got to the month of January, bro. I thought that I was going to be one of the only people in the draft community that actually know that Devon Witherspoon was going to be a beast. But everybody else started catching on to him, and it kind of irritated me a little bit. But they drafted him really high, and you're going to be pairing him up with Tariq Woolen, who a lot of Seahawks fans would tell you that Tariq Woolen is better than Sauce Gardner. Now, I think you're tripping if you believe that. I still think Sauce Gardner is that dude, but I do think Tariq Woolen is really good. Shoot, and then you got Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant, he was a little bit inconsistent last year, but shoot, you look at that secondary, it's going to be really nice. And now, hopefully, Jamal Adams can find a way to piece himself back together and find a way to stay on the field and get healthy again. Now, some people may think Jamal Adams is overrated. I was going back and forth with one of my homeboys. He was like, man, JT, Jamal Adams ain't that good. I was like, man, you tripping. He may not be that good in coverage, but this dude brings a lot to the table in terms of how you can utilize him on your defense. So you look at Seattle, a lot of y'all in the chat, y'all don't think Seattle is a legitimate contender, but I really think that Seattle is going to surprise y'all. I think that Seattle is a dark horse Super Bowl contender. I think that they have a really good roster. Now, the next two teams that I think are going to be able to challenge Philadelphia are going to be the Detroit Lions and maybe the Dallas Cowboys. Now, let me say why I say maybe when it comes to the Dallas Cowboys, because y'all know one thing about the Dallas Cowboys is that it's not a question, are they going to make it to the postseason? We know they're going to make it to the playoffs, but what are they going to do once they get to the playoffs, man? They get to the playoffs and they shit the bed every single time. And then they got rid of Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore is one of the best play callers in the NFL, and I will live and die on that hill that he was scapegoated. Dak Prescott was acting like this dude couldn't read defenses to save his life. You saw what he did against the San Francisco 49ers, man. He sold the game. He sold the game. I know you may be upset with me filming this art, but I'm trying to tell you, bruh. You know Dak Prescott isn't all that reliable when you get to the postseason. Now, Dallas does have a really good roster. I think they have a really good offensive line. You got Tony Pollard, who's going to be a monster. I plan on drafting him in all my fantasy football squads. And that defense with Dan Quinn is going to be amongst the best in the NFL. Dan Quinn, this dude has been coaching his tail off the last couple of years, man. That defense that they assembling in Dallas is looking damn scary. And if Dallas is going to be able to challenge Philadelphia, I think the large reason for that is going to be because of that defense. But offensively, though, you were able to give Dak Prescott some more weapons. Michael Gallup last season was still trying to get back to full health from that injury that he suffered the year before. His play just went automatically down. But you bring in Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks, this dude's been passed around more than a freak in high school, but this dude is still the most underrated and underappreciated wide receiver in the league. You watch what he was doing with the Houston Texans the last couple of years. He was pretty much the only weapon that they had on offense. So you give Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, and Michael Gallup is able to be your third option. You got a really good passing attack going into this year if you're Mike McCarthy. But my concerns about Dallas lie with Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy. One thing about Mike McCarthy, he's going to sell in big games. Now, hopefully that can change this season, but I'm not overlooking Dallas. That's why I had to put them on this list, but I have a question mark around them. Because we know Dallas is going to get you to the playoffs, but when it comes to the postseason, once they get there, they crap the bed 2 times too often. But I really think this year, Dallas actually should be taken seriously. For real. And the Detroit Lions, man. Now, the Detroit Lions, it's really weird talking about the Detroit Lions having the opportunity to win the NFC. These boys been bad for how many decades? And now we're talking about them having a shot at being able to compete with the Philadelphia Eagles, people? The Detroit Lions, Dan Quinn, biting kneecaps. They were the hottest team in the NFL last season. Jared Goff was the hottest QB at the end of 2022. This man went the second half of last season without throwing a single interception. He may be a top 10 QB going into this season. You got Amon-Ra St. Brown. You give them Jahmyr Gibbs? Jahmyr Gibbs with their offensive coordinator Ben Johnson? Ooh, Detroit finna cook this year, people. Detroit's finna cook. You can laugh at me saying they're a contender all you want to, but this team can cook. They got an offensive coordinator that really knows how to scheme things up. With Jahmyr Gibbs, how are you going to game plan for that? This dude, not only is he a really explosive threat every time he touches the ball coming out of the backfield, but you can line him up in the slot. You know Jahmyr Gibbs and B. John Robinson, who they train with? They train with Goldfeet Global down in South Florida. And y'all know I spent a lot of time down there in South Florida. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be a matchup nightmare. But the biggest question about Detroit is probably going to be that secondary and that defense overall. That defense was abysmal last season, but they made a lot of additions in free agency. Emmanuel Mosley, Cam Sutton that corner. You bring in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, a.k.a. Deuce Deuce. The Detroit Lions, man, these boys are a legitimate threat. And if you're the Philadelphia Eagles, out of all the teams that you probably don't want to see on this list, you don't want to see the 49ers and the Detroit Lions, because the Detroit Lions, they can score a lot of points on you. And they can do it with pretty much ease. And although Philadelphia still is going to have a really good defense, man, the Detroit Lions, they're legit this year. I know it sounds a little bit odd to be talking about Detroit and this kind of conversation because they've been down for years, but the Detroit Lions are legit. They got a really good squad going into this year, man. So when it comes to the biggest threats to the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC this year, I got the Seahawks, the 49ers, the Detroit Lions, and the Dallas Cowboys. CJ Stroud, man. Y'all boys know I'm effed up about CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud went second overall to the Houston Texans, and there's a lot of debate about if he was even better than Bryce Young. And you pretty much could say it was 1A, 1B, but for the Houston Texans, you are getting an absolute stud at the QB position. This man, CJ Stroud, already has been looking like a seasoned vet so far throughout training camp. This man has already dethroned Davis Mills, just like that. Who's surprised? And when you look at Houston, I think that Houston is going to be a lot better than what a lot of people are giving them credit for. You're going to have an elite defense with D'Amico Ryans being a defensive-minded coach and the young talent that they have on the defense side of the football. So if CJ Stroud makes a couple of mistakes, he's going to have a defense that's going to be good enough to bail him out. And offensively, they may not have a lot of big-name talent around him, but I do think they have a good enough amount of talent for him to be pretty effective this year. You got Robert Woods, who, he's pretty much on his last leg of his career. You wonder if he can stay healthy. But you got Tank Dell. Y'all boys know how I feel about Tank Dell. I done made plenty of videos talking about Tank Dell. Him and CJ Stroud already been hitting it off. He's been his go-to target so far. OTAs, him and Tank Dell been getting busy. They've been getting busy. Now, they also have another wide receiver that I'm really high on, and Xavier Hutchinson out of Iowa State. This guy reminds me a lot of George Pickens. So there's some young talent to work with. You also have John Mechie, who still pretty much is going into his rookie season. We can't forget about Dalton Schultz, former tight end for the Dallas Cowboys. He's also going to be really good. You got Dameon Pierce. You're going to have Devin Singletary, but mainly I'm more excited about Dameon Pierce because he was carrying me on my fantasy football squad. So CJ Stroud has some weapons to throw the football to. Now, the biggest question that most people are going to have about Houston is going to be the protection that they're going to be giving CJ Stroud up front. And most people think that the Houston Texans offensive line is dog water, and it's not. Houston's offensive line, what I'm about to say may surprise you, but it's actually pretty solid. You may not think that, but if you actually go back and you watch how their offensive tackles performed last season, and Laremy Tunsil and Titus Howard, I think they only combined and gave up 4 to 5 sacks total. Titus Howard, he gave up more than Laremy Tunsil, but his offensive tackle position is really good. You bring in Shaq Mason, who's going to be solidifying one of your offensive guard spots. Now we just have to worry about who the center is going to be and who's going to be playing that other offensive guard position. But for CJ Stroud, this season, I'm expecting this man to have a really productive rookie season. If I had to give you a stat prediction, I'd probably say he throws for 3,800 yards, 24 touchdowns, and has 8 to 9 interceptions. He has elite accuracy. He has fantastic ball placement. A lot of people say that CJ Stroud, he struggles under pressure. And I will agree with that to a certain extent, but I think he's a little bit better under pressure than what people give him credit for. When you look at his ball placement, his accuracy, it was arguably the best coming out of this draft, even better than Bryce Young. Now, that's a debate for another day. But when you look at CJ Stroud, he's also a really good decision maker. He doesn't make tons of mistakes. You just wonder how is he going to fare under pressure. But when you look at this division, I mean, there's not too many teams in the AFC South that have fantastic pass rushes. Indianapolis doesn't really have one outside of DeForest Buckner. The Jacksonville Jaguars don't really have anybody that's really going to scare you, although we could be wrong about that depending on how Trayvon Walker develops. And Indianapolis, I mean, come on, man. And then Tennessee, come on, man. I mean, they have some good rotational pieces, but I don't think they're really going to have enough to really give Houston a lot of problems up front. This is a really good team that Houston has for CJ Stroud going into this year. Your concern may be wide receiver, but I don't really think that wide receiver is devoid of talent. I just think it's more unproven. And I think you're going to have a lot of guys with CJ Stroud at QB who are going to get their play elevated. A lot of these wide receivers who weren't really on your radar last season, they need to be on your radar this year. Nico Collins, I think he's greatly going to benefit from playing with a guy like CJ Stroud that has a really good deep ball. Nico Collins, I think he's a really good 50-50 ball wide receiver. It's just that Davis Mills just wasn't able to get in the ball at times. CJ Stroud, man, with the wide receiving core and the weapons that he has, he's going to have the recipe to be a clear contender for Offensive Rookie of the Year. And if CJ Stroud ends up being as good as advertised, the Houston Texans, I've been saying it for the start of this offseason, ever since the draft concluded, they're going to have a legitimate shot at being able to compete for second place in this division and possibly be able to compete with the Jaguars. That may sound a little bit crazy, but with how this defense is looking and how CJ Stroud has been performing in OTAs so far, and don't tell me, man, JT, everybody looks good in OTAs, as Will Levis, how he's been doing in OTAs so far. Okay, so when I look at CJ Stroud, I see a QB that's going to be really consistent. He's kind of robotic, man. Like, once this dude gets into rhythm, he's really hard to stop. But if you do get a little bit of pressure in his face at times, he kind of can get a little bit rattled at times. But I think for Houston and DeMeco Ryans and the coaching staff and the team that they have assembled going into this year, CJ Stroud should have a really good and productive rookie season. Him and Bryce Young, I don't really know who's going to end up having the better rookie year because I think both of them can be really good. I think that CJ Stroud and Bryce Young are both going to emerge as at least being top 15 QBs right out the gate. CJ Stroud was a generational QB. Y'all may think that CJ Stroud is a good QB prospect, but there were a lot of scouts and a lot of GMs who held CJ Stroud and Bryce Young in high regard. They feel like both of those two guys are some of the better QB prospects to come out in recent memory. So I think CJ Stroud, if you're a Texans fan, you got a lot to be excited about when it comes to how he's going to perform this year. You got a solid receiving core, not great, but solid. And you're going to have a lot of receivers who most people outside of Texans fans don't really know about. But come the end of this year, most of you guys are probably going to have them on your fantasy football squads. Let's talk about some college football, man. Oregon, they had a really fantastic first year under head coach Dan Lanning. Even though they got trounced by Georgia, this team really performed at a really high level. And Bo Nix, who would have thought that Bo Nix, the dude who had a somewhat disappointing career at Auburn, would go to Oregon and have his career revitalized? I mean, Bo Nix, there are people who are talking about this guy potentially being a first-round pick in next year's draft, and he's already viewed as a premier contender for the Heisman Trophy. Now, when it comes to Oregon making it into the college football playoffs, it is going to be really tough to do because they're playing in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is going to be a juggernaut this year. And they got a really tough schedule. You got to go on the road to play Texas Tech. They're going to be pretty good this year. You got to go on the road to play Washington and Utah. And you got to play USC and Oregon State at home. So their road to the college football playoffs, people, is not easy. But when you look at this team, with the fact that they have Bo Nix, they're going to have a good chance to be able to be in the college football mix. Now, you are wondering, JT, how's this offense going to look with the departure of Kenny Dillingham, who now is the head coach of Arizona State? Well, they replaced him with offensive coordinator Will Stein. And Will Stein was the co-OC down there with the UTSA Roadrunners. And their offense was really dynamic. Not only was he the co-offensive coordinator, but he also was their QB's coach. So many Oregon fans have a lot of faith and confidence in Will Stein. Dan Lanning, this is somebody who I think has done a fantastic job at assembling his coaching staff. He's learned under Kirby Smart, who does a really good job at building good coaching staffs. So I trust Dan Lanning's judgment, and I trust that Will Stein is going to have this offense clicking at a really high level. And I think that Oregon's offense is in good hands under Will Stein. The wide receiving core is fantastic, amongst the best in the Pac-12. You got Troy Franklin, who may be the fastest receiver in college football. You got Chris Hudson. He comes back. You got running back Bucky Irvin. This dude was averaging damn near 7 yards per carry last season. Do you know how insane it is to average nearly 7 yards per attempt? Now, if you want to be exact, he has 6.8 yards per carry that he had last year. And then you got Noah Whittington. Now, the question that most people have about Oregon's offense is going to be in the trenches on the offensive line. Now, Oregon, I'm just going to give them the benefit of a doubt, and I think that this offensive line is going to be pretty good. I know when you look at it on paper, it kind of gives you a little bit pause for concern, but Oregon normally recruits the offensive line really well. And normally they do a really good job at developing the offensive line. And even though Mario Cristobal is gone, I still think that there's a good amount of talent on this offensive line for it to be pretty good. So I'm not really concerned about Oregon's offensive line. Now, this defense is probably the biggest question that you should have about if Oregon's going to be a college football contender, man. Because in the Pac-12, there's not really too many good defensive teams in this conference. You got a lot of teams who air the football out. And if Oregon's going to have a shot at making it to the college football playoffs, this defense is going to be what makes or break them. You're going to have to play Texas Tech, who's more than capable of being able to put points up on offense. You got to play Washington and Utah. And you saw what Washington did to this offense last season. And then you got to play Oregon State. You saw what Oregon State did to Oregon last year. These boys won the game, and they didn't really need their quarterback to throw the football at all. They were running the ball on Oregon. And they also had some key players on special teams. So for Oregon, this defense has to be way better than what it was last season. But I think that it will, because Dan Lanning is a defensive-minded head coach. He was a defensive coordinator back there under Kirby Smart at Georgia. So if you're a defensive-minded coach, you should be able to elevate the play of your defense. So there's no reason why Oregon's defense should be as bad as what it was last season. And playing in a conference like the Pac-12, you have to be able to slow down these quarterbacks. You're going to be going against Michael Penix, Caleb Williams, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward. These are some of the better quarterbacks in college football who are more than capable of being able to dissect your defense if you don't have a good secondary. Now, they did hit the transfer portal pretty hard. They do have a good amount of returning production coming back on defense. I think their defensive line looks pretty good. They got edge rusher Jordan Burch from South Carolina. Dan Lanning and this Oregon coaching staff have been raving about his performance during spring practice. You got cornerback Kyrie Wilson, who transfers from Alabama. I don't know how many of you guys remember, but he was the number one JUCO prospect coming out of 2021, and he didn't really play that much for Alabama outside of special teams. He's going to be pretty good this year. You also have Evan Williams, who is a transfer from Fresno State. He was one of the better defensive backs coming out of the Mountain West Conference. This is a really good Oregon team, and can they make it to the college football playoffs in 2023? I think they have a fantastic chance. When you talk about teams who a lot of people like to make it to the college football playoffs out of the Pac-12, most people are going to tell you USC and Washington and possibly Utah, but I really like Oregon to be that second team right behind Washington. I do like Caleb Williams and USC, but I don't really know how their defense is going to look. And if I had to put more faith in Oregon's defense than USC's defense, I will. Just for the simple fact that Dan Lanning is a defensive-minded coach and Alex Grinch isn't really a good defensive coordinator. So I think for USC, yeah, they're going to be able to score a lot of points on offense, but who can't score a lot of points on offense in this conference? This conference is going to come down to what team can get the best performance out of their defense. And I think the two best defensive teams in this conference that have the best shot at being able to compete for the Pac-12 is going to be Washington and Oregon. And for USC, defensively, I just don't know if it's going to be good enough to get them in that conversation. You got Caleb Williams, so you're going to have a phenomenal offense, but I don't know about that defense. I have way more faith in Oregon's and Washington's defense going into this year than I do USC. This is not a conference that you're going to be able to win just outscoring everybody. Eventually, you're going to have to get some stops on defense, or you're going to hope that your offense has a chance to win a game. But even then, I really think that Oregon has a strong chance to make it to the college football playoffs. Your only concerns are going to be how is that defense going to perform? And I think it should perform at a pretty high level with Dan Lanning being a defensive-minded coach. He should be able to get the most out of that defense. And Dan Lanning is a pretty damn good coach. I don't think anybody expected Oregon to have as good as the season that they had under him in year one. And going into year two with a good amount of production coming back on that defense, and you add some talent in the transfer portal, Oregon should have a defense that's good enough to help them compete for the Pac-12 championship and possibly make it to the college football playoffs. Now, if I had to give you a definitive yes or no answer, do I believe Oregon will make it to the college football playoffs? I probably would tell you no. Simply for the fact that I like the Washington Huskies a little bit more than I like Oregon. Washington has a squad this season. They have one of the best teams in college football. They have several guys who are going to be drafted highly in next year's NFL draft. And for Oregon, yeah, I do think their defense is going to improve, but overall, I just think that Washington has the most talented team in the Pac-12 going into this season. But I do think that Oregon has a pretty good chance of being able to make it to the college football playoffs. It just all depends on how improved that defense is going to be, and is that offensive line going to be good enough to step up and still give you the same production that you have had at that position for the past couple of years. Now, the last thing I got to talk about is this. So I was reading the comments of my recent video that I did about the Miami Dolphins. And I said that the Miami Dolphins were dark horse Super Bowl contenders going into this season. And there were a lot of Dolphins fans who said that they're not just dark horse contenders, but they are legit Super Bowl contenders. And I said legit Super Bowl contenders. I mean, you mean to tell me that Tua Tagovailoa is going to be able to stay healthy, that the offensive line is going to perform at an elite level? And I ended up going back and forth with one of these guys in the comment section, and he says that, I guess he's a Dolphins fan, Junior Cruz 3866 says that you can't be a dark horse Super Bowl contender when you have one of the top 3 most talented rosters in football, which Miami has. Miami ain't no dark horse. They're a Super Bowl contender if they're mostly healthy. Now, I'm sitting here reading this just a little bit apart. I'm like, what? Miami has one of the top 3 most talented rosters in the NFL. So you know what I clapped back and said? I said that they aren't favorites to win the division. As a matter of fact, they're third behind the Bills and the Jets to win the AFC East. And they're tied with the Ravens for the 5th best odds to win the AFC. I'm going by odds, and the Dolphins do not have a top 3 roster in the NFL when they have questionable offensive line play, and they aren't better than the Bengals, the Ravens, the Chiefs, the Eagles, the 49ers, the Seahawks, or even the Cowboys. Now, the reason why I go off odds is because y'all got to know that I bet on this stuff. I bet on over-under win totals, and I also put a lot of money on futures bets. So that's why when I come to analyzing and judging teams based on if they're overrated, underrated, I normally go by Vegas odds. So that's why I always normally refer to the odds when I'm addressing if a team's underrated or overrated. And then he claps back and says, JT Sports, you go by the odds? Why? Them stupid odds don't mean shit anyway. The Seahawks? And he puts a lot of laughing emojis. I'm effing dead, yo. You really just said the Seahawks are better than the Dolphins? Yes, fool. Have you not seen how good of a roster Seattle has? Their offensive line is way better than Miami's. They're going to have way better offensive line play. They have top 5 receiving core in the NFL with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, in the addition of Jackson Smith-Njigba. Now, although Miami does have a really good receiving core with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, that's just 2 guys. 2 guys. Your third best receiver is nowhere going to be close to how good Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be. And then, yeah, you probably can say that your defense under Vic Fangio is possibly going to be better than Seattle's, which I'm going to give you that. But when it comes to some of the other teams in the NFL, Kansas City, Cincinnati, let's be for real, folks. Let's be for real for a second. Let's be for real for a second. You mean to tell me that the Miami Dolphins are going to have a better roster than the Dallas Cowboys, the Seattle Seahawks, teams that have way better offensive lines? Y'all not even the best team in y'all division. Are you being serious right now? You think that y'all have a better roster than the New York Jets? And your main talking point was Aaron Rodgers? Aaron Rodgers? I mean, yeah. Aaron Rodgers, when he's playing at his best, this dude is better than Tua Tagovailoa or Tua, Mr. Injury-prone Tagovailoa. And I'm not saying that the Dolphins don't have a talented team, but to say they have a top 3 roster in the NFL makes you a little bit delusional. You mean to tell me you have one of the top 3 best rosters in the league? Your roster isn't touching San Francisco. And then what blows me the most, right? I hate people who do this. Miami is better than Dallas, and the Ravens too. They beat Baltimore the last 2 times they played. Listen, you cannot judge the future of NFL games and outcomes based on history. The Ravens team that you're playing this season is not the same Ravens team that you played last year. They have way more weapons and a better offensive coordinator, and also their defense was way better at the end of last season versus how they were when they first played y'all. And then let's continue. He says, stop listening to them stupid odds, kid. Kid, doesn't this fool look like a kid himself? Whatever. The Jets also don't have a more talented roster than Miami. I don't care about 90-year-old Aaron Rodgers, buddy. Look at Miami's roster top to bottom. If they get Dalvin Cook, Miami is officially a super team. Miami is a super team if they get Dalvin Cook, people. If they get Dalvin Cook, Miami's a Super Bowl team. They're a Super Bowl caliber football team. Who's going to be blocking for Dalvin Cook? Behind that offensive line, good luck, Dalvin Cook. Good luck. Now, your defense is going to be really good. You do have some dogs on defense. We know about Jalen Ramsey, Jalen Phillips. Bradley Chubb should get his play elevated under Vic Fangio being the defensive coordinator. He was his head coach back when he was playing for him at Denver. But for Miami, having a better talented team than the Buffalo Bills and the New York Jets, not it, bro. Your offensive line is not better than Buffalo's, and it damn sure ain't better than the New York Jets or the Kansas City Chiefs or the Cincinnati Bengals. The Miami Dolphins have way too many question marks when it comes to the health of Tua and how good the offensive line is going to perform for them to be considered having a top 3 roster. Xavier Howard was not good last year, and Dolphins fans want to blame it all on injuries. Listen, if you're healthy enough to play, you should be able to go out and produce. Xavier Howard was getting cooked last season, dog. You don't know how many times I turned on the Dolphins game and I saw Xavier Howard looking like roast chicken. Xavier Howard was looking like roast chicken out there, man. We know Jalen Ramsey's locked down, but Xavier Howard, fam, this dude had a fall from grace last year. Now, playing under Vic Fangio, his play should improve. But Miami's roster is not more talented than Cincinnati. You want to go position by position? Well, we don't really have enough time to be going position by position. But first of all, when it comes to Kansas City, you don't have Patty Mahomes. You don't have a better offensive line than Kansas City. Your receiving core is better than Kansas City. But Kansas City is a team that's able to get elevated because they have Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid as a play caller. And even then, they got Travis Kelce. But okay, I'll give you the advantage at receiver. On defense, I mean, I think that Kansas City's secondary isn't as good as Miami's on paper. I think their defensive line is better than Miami's. Christian Wilkins, I like him a lot. That dude is a dog, but he's not giving you the same production that Chris Jones gives you at the pass rush position. They also do have that other guy, I'm trying to think of his name right now. The dude out of, what's his name? What's that other pass rusher that they have, man? George Karlaftis. They got George Karlaftis. They have a really good group of linebackers. Hell, one of their linebackers, Nick Bolton, you could have made the argument that he should have been in discussion for Super Bowl MVP. The Dolphins linebackers are okay, but I don't think they're as good as Kansas City's. So when you look at the Dolphins roster compared to Kansas City, I don't think you have a more talented roster than Kansas City, and you damn sure don't have a more talented roster than the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, Dolphins fans, they look at their roster and they look at their top guys. They don't look at their overall depth. The Cincinnati Bengals are 3 deep at receiver. Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase. Their offensive line is going to be really good. Your offensive line is not as good as Cincinnati's, and you don't have Joe Burrow at QB. Joe Burrow, without a doubt, is the second best QB in the league behind Patrick Mahomes. And their defense under Lou Anarumo is always going to be really fantastic. And Vic Fangio's defenses are always pretty good, but defensively, I think that you may have the argument that your defense could be better than Cincinnati's. But overall, we go to Philadelphia. You damn sure don't have a better roster than them. You don't have a better roster than Seattle. Seattle not only has talent, but they also have great depth. I don't think that the Dolphins have a top 3 roster in the NFL. And the Dolphins aren't even expected to be competing for the division title. They're probably going to be in 3rd place. They still are going to be able to make it to the postseason, but I don't think they're going to be able to knock off Buffalo. Did you not see how Tua Tagovailoa played in big games last season? Did you not see how Mike McDaniel's offense got figured out against Brandon Staley, the 49ers? I mean, come on. Like, Dolphins fans, listen, you have reasons to be optimistic this year. You do have a shot at winning the Super Bowl, but to say that you have a better chance at winning the Super Bowl than Kansas City, Cincinnati, and saying that you have a top 3 roster in the NFL makes you sound really delusional. Really delusional. I mean, you have 2 really good receivers. You're not 3 deep at receiver like Seattle, Cincinnati, and some of the other teams that are better than you in this division or in this conference. I mean, the New York Jets, they have Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard, Mecole Hardman. I mean, yeah, your receiving core with Waddle and Hill is better, but you don't have more depth. That's really what it comes down to. You guys are just looking at your top starters. You're not really taking a deep look into your overall depth. The Miami Dolphins offensive line is amongst the worst in the NFL. You signed, did this guy say they signed Isaiah Wynn? Isaiah Wynn? He said they signed Isaiah Wynn. No way he said they signed Isaiah Wynn, bro. No way. Did he say they signed Isaiah Wynn? I gotta see this. I have to see this because I know this dude said something about them signing Isaiah Wynn. Yeah, and the offensive line improved it too with Isaiah Wynn. Are you serious? Are you serious right now? Y'all signed Isaiah Wynn? Isaiah Wynn? That dude is a reclamation project. Outside of Teron Armstead at left tackle, the majority of your offensive linemen, you're banking on potential and development. Potential and development doesn't win you championships. Isaiah Wynn, there's a reason why New England didn't bring him back. If Isaiah Wynn was good, do you think New England would let him walk out of Foxborough? I know New England doesn't really pay a lot of money to keep guys around, but they always put a lot of emphasis on keeping the offensive line up to snuff and the defensive line up to snuff. Isaiah Wynn is not that good. He's coming off the worst season of his career. Come on, man. Come on. Be real. I like the Dolphins. Like I said, y'all are dark horse Super Bowl contenders. Y'all have way more questions than teams like Kansas City and Cincinnati. But to say that you have a top 3 roster in the NFL, bro, you tripping. You tripping hard. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, leave us with a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. All you got to do is go down to the description down below, scroll down. You'll see all our podcast links. Give us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify if you want to help support the channel. Like the stream, subscribe to the channel. We go live every day, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Occasionally, we will do a call-in show, which I will have one coming soon. But I appreciate you guys for listening to this episode, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with another episode of the JT Sports